All right, welcome to a special live edition of On Texas Football. I'm Jeff Howe, joined by CJ Vogel as I'm having some technical difficulties. Just got done wrapping up the Steve Sarkisian press conference, practice number 10 for the Longhorns, and the spring is in the books. We'll have a Sark cut because we've got his opening statement from today. CJ and I will be going over spring standouts coming off of the scrimmage on Saturday, kind of what Sark is looking for the rest of the spring. And everybody's talking about the Nico Iamalevala Tennessee situation. Sark addressed it today, so we'll talk about that. Do want to let everybody know this special live edition of On Texas Football brought to you by Advanced Pain Care, and we'll hear from Advanced Pain Care here shortly with the help of a couple lifetime Longhorns to get you a message from our sponsor today. But CJ, let's start there. Let's start with the spring standouts, like I mentioned at the top. And Sark rattled off a couple of different guys on offense and defense. We'll go over the full list, but start which one of those names jumped out at you the most?
Yeah, for me, it was Warren Roberson. I think it's really encouraging to hear his name going into year three. Of course, we've heard Sarkisian also mention the cornerback room as one that looks physically the best of any other position on the roster at the moment. And so on top of a Manny Muhammad and what we know of now being a Kobe Black and a Jalen Gilbo out wide, Warren Roberson's making some impact, and that's encouraging, of course, because, look, it's been a long kind of developmental path for Warren Roberson. It's one that you saw him often on special teams last year. You didn't hear a lot about him on the field before that. So to hear that he's making an impact right now, really encouraging in that regard. And, of course, Texas cornerback room, just so many bodies that you could throw out. Another versatile guy that you could bump around a safety nickel if needed just to get a guy on the field. So it's going to be really interesting to see how he's used this fall. But, Jeff, another one I think needs to be talked about is Amari Winston, the freshman tight end. My goodness, did Sark have some positive things to say about him. We might have lost Jeff there for a little bit. So Amari Winston, Sark had great words to say about him. He's being cross-trained at the wide receiver spot as well as the tight end position. Two positives there. He said he's about 245, we'll say upper 240s in terms of his weight, which is maybe a bit surprising because I'm sure many of y'all saw the photo of Amari Winston and Arch Manning. Arch Manning probably has 2 full inches in height over Amari Winston. So not a big tight end, but a versatile guy, right? 240, runs very well. He's very smooth in and out of his breaks, and he's using his hands well. I think that's something that was one of the selling points for Texas to take Amari Winston out of high school. Again, that tight end room with no Jordan Washington this spring, with Texas being very thin at the position, plenty of opportunities right now. And I was told over the weekend during Saturday's practice, there was a lot of 12 personnel. So we'll continue to monitor both guys right there. Of course, Parker Livingstone was another that Sarkisian mentioned has had another good spring. Positives all the way around. Plenty more to go, and I'll have some nuggets over on TexasFootball.com and in regards to the spring scrimmage. But real quick, before we get to those, Matthew, a quick word from Steve Sarkisian in his opening statement today.
Wrapped up practice 10 today, so with 5 to go. And, a couple things we touched on with the players is, hey, we're in this process of growth, and we're in this process of consistent growth, right? Because we're all trying to find the players we can trust, right? And that can show us that they can be trusted and that they can grow within and then sustain over time. And so, I think there's a level of consistency we're striving for in all 3 phases. We've definitely seen a lot of flashes from a lot of people. And it's now who can replicate that practice after practice after practice. And so I've been proud of the work ethic of our guys. I love the connectivity this team has. They work really hard together. And now we're just trying to continue to elevate them. Like I said, we've got 5 practices to go. We're trying to impress upon them a real sense of urgency to maximize these 5 days that are coming up, and to be really intentional with our approach, to be really intentional on what we're trying to get better at individually and collectively so that we can really grow as a team heading into the summer and then into fall camp. So like I said, that this is a really important time for us, these last 5 practices, because really offense, defense, the bulk of all that stuff is in. It's now who can retain, who can fine tune and tweak some of those little things and then show us the growth, right? That they're not flatlining, that they're able to continue to grow and get better, so that we can get a real good sense of what we're going to be looking like headed into the summer.
course, you hear it there from Sarkisian. Finding a way to keep these next 5 practices moving, Jeff. We also heard it was a very physical practice on Saturday. One that we weren't expecting a lot to see in this spring. Of course, Sark said it's going to be more of an OTA model. We've heard that Texas doesn't want to put a lot of strain on the bodies of these guys physically. Yet Saturday's practice, getting out there, a little bit of a live scrimmage towards the end, it allowed for these guys to get an understanding of live hitting, understanding the live ball protection, 2 big keys that Texas and the staff wanted to hone in on this weekend, and they certainly did.
Think of this, CJ, as like your college course where you got a midterm exam, but the midterm is weighed a lot more than the final, right? Because the final is just going to be a practice the morning of fan day on the 26th, and we don't know what all that's going to entail. But the midterm was big, and I think now one of the things Sark said there that stood out to me was basically the base offense and defense, their base concepts are in. Now it's about, okay, as we start to add more, who's going to get it, who's not. And this is kind of – it's really good that the bulk of the recruiting class is on campus right now because this will give them a taste of camp because camp's going to follow a similar format because as we talk about all the times with camp, and especially with an opener like Texas has this year, when you get about 2.5, 3 weeks out from that Ohio State game, pretty much after that second camp scrimmage, at that point, you got to get ready to go play a football game. So then it becomes about instead of, hey, here's our base install, now we're working on opponent-specific things. We're working on things that maybe you might have repped this only a couple times. The guys that can retain it are going to be the guys that have an advantage. And then from that pool of players, we're going to be the guys that help them in that opener against Ohio State. So that's a really interesting thing that Sark said. So it makes you feel good about the progress that this team is making, especially with so many new faces. And I continue to really dig the leadership on this team. I mean, Sark talked about it today with Anthony Hill kind of leading the linebacker room, and he's helping out a guy like Trey Moore who's making that switch from edge and now having to learn off-ball linebacker. So I like the leadership on this team. I like the dynamics of it. Even in that offensive line room, too. I don't want to sell those guys short because Sark mentioned, Cole Hudson and DJ Campbell are the guys that have been around for a while. And they're helping bring along a Brandon Baker who doesn't have a ton of experience, or a guy like Neto who's been around but doesn't have the in-game rep. So I just like the fact that anytime you're hearing about position group leadership that's starting to emerge in certain camp, that's always a good thing. CJ, let's get to some of these spring standouts, right? Because we've got a few guys that Sark talked about. You mentioned Warren Roberson, and just in case anybody's joining late, Sark brought it. Now this isn't to say that if any of these guys are not on the list or guys that Sark didn't mention that they're having a bad spring. But these are the guys that Sark mentioned by name when he was talking about spring standouts. If I can find the right tweet here. There we go. The guys that Sark mentioned specifically by name. And CJ, let me know if I forget anybody. Warren Roberson, Jelani McDonald, Hero Canoe, Cole Brevard, Brad Spence, Amari Winston, Parker Livingstone, Brandon Baker. Those guys. Now, some of those guys, like Parker Livingstone, you talked about Warren Roberson a minute ago, Jelani McDonald, I don't think that's big of a surprise. Hero Canoe is interesting, CJ, because we assume that, and Sark has mentioned it, they're going to go look in the portal for another defensive lineman. And Hero Canoe is a guy that still, in a lot of ways, still learning the game, was stuck behind some really good players at Ohio State. But this gives me a little bit of confidence that, he wasn't just sitting there, to borrow Bill Parcells' line, toasting marshmallows in a meeting room with Larry Johnson at Ohio State. He was actually learning some stuff about defensive line play. So I like the fact that Hero Canoe and Cole Brevard, who we talked about before, he's got Big Ten experience at Penn State and at Purdue. The fact that you got both those guys that Sark is like what he's seen from them in the spring, it's got to make you feel a little bit better about what's happening on the interior D-line. On top of what we talked about Saturday after the scrimmage, and you mentioned it with the defensive line getting the better of the offense, at least that defensive line getting the better of the offense in some of those live situations in short yardage.
Yeah, Hero Canoe, again, another one of those kind of question mark guys, because a guy that you didn't see a lot of on the field at Ohio State. You kind of wonder where he is in terms of SEC-ready defensive lineman, yet I've heard his name a couple times. We mentioned him on Saturday after the practice and the scrimmage then, and to hear it from Sarkisian, it's a good note, right? Because you got about 4 guys that you feel comfortable with, right? Alex January, Cole Brevard, those probably going to be your 1-2 starters. Travis Shaw's been limited a little bit this spring, and now Hero Canoe. Now, we don't think Texas is done at the defensive line position, but to hear him singled out today by Sarkisian, again, very much a positive, and it should give an idea, and Sark mentioned it, last 3 years, Texas sent 2 defensive linemen each to the NFL. We know Cole Brevard's going to be in that conversation by the end of it. Alex January is not yet NFL ready in terms of his eligibility to depart for the NFL draft. But could a Travis Shaw make a jump? Could it be Hero Kanu? We'll have to wait and see. But, again, a positive to hear those names on the defensive line who, again, we've heard about had some bright moments on Saturday.
What do you make of Amari Winston? Because he's a guy not as highly rated as some of the other guys in the class, one of the more lower-rated guys in the class. Probably doesn't have the NFL upside that some other guys in the class have. Probably not the most NFL upside of anybody in that tight end room. But at the end of the day, because your numbers are what they are at tight end, which Sark has talked about, they're not good, and you can look at the depth chart and see that they're not good, especially after they were not good before Jordan Washington's injury. And now that he's missed the spring, it really shows that, hey, they've got a depth problem at tight end. They need to address in the portal. But, hey, they've had to give reps to Spencer Shannon and to Ridge Barker and Emory Winston. And kind of for Emory Winston, CJ, this could maybe be his only opportunity when you look at Nick Townsend coming in and then whatever they do at tight end. Texas happens to get Mark Bowman in the 2026 class. As strange as it is, this could be now or never for Amari Winston to make an impression on the staff. So it's a good thing now that with the chance to do it that he's doing it.
Yeah, and it was really interesting. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, Jeff. For Amari Winston specifically, to cross-train at the wide receiver spot and tight end, just flexing that versatility as a bigger body, tight end, wide receiver hybrid. Again, he's only about 6'1.5", 6'1 3/4 or whatnot, but he's weighing north of 240, right? So bigger body, bigger, interesting, mismatched body, if that makes sense. So great to hear that this is a guy who's taking advantage of his opportunities, because to your point, Jeff, this is the best opportunity that I think many of these guys in that tight end room will get, Spencer Shannon included, Ridge Barker. You're not going to get many more second and first team reps than what you're currently seeing once Jordan Washington comes back. We'll see how quickly a Nick Townsend's able to come along as well. But all in all, a very positive comment and review of Amari Winston so far this spring. A guy that great hands and very smooth in and out of his routes. I think it's going to be something that Texas is able to use at the next level sometime in the next couple of years.
All right, CJ, we'll get into Sark's press conference a little bit more, but before we do that, as we get some activity going on overhead, before we do that, let's take a minute to tell you about our sponsor with the help of a couple of lifetime Longhorns. Here's a message from Advanced Pain Care.
Pros know the pain stops here.
Physical therapy helps me as an athlete then and now. And do I still need therapy? Yes. Advanced Pain Care helps with that.
Injuries will stack up. They'll add up. You can't let those injuries get you down, and Advanced Pain Care has been very helpful for me.
We can help with whatever's got you down, from nerve damage to our spinal cord stimulator. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Same-day appointments available.
Advanced Pain Care. The pain stops here.
CJ, one thing Sark said, too, that really struck a chord with me, I've been saying it on the channel and over on TexasFootball.com. You asked about the kickers, and I think you probably got the first kicker question in this spring. Here we are. We're over halfway through spring ball, and we've only talked to Sark a couple times, but we're just now hearing about the kickers. But Sark said that with the way their roster's built, with the speed and the length they have, and I've talked about guys with good size to athleticism/speed ratios, Texas should have the best special teams unit, arguably in the country. Their coverage units, their return units, at least in terms of blocking. And we'll see if they find somebody in the portal that's got punt return experience at the very least. If DeAndre Moore worked there last year, he was the backup punt returner. So, CJ, when you look at Texas on special teams, we'll see. We'll get into that kicking battle between Will Stone, and Bert Auburn. But at least from a coverage, blocking, return standpoint, I like that Sark is on the same page with the rest of us there. There's no reason why Texas shouldn't be elite there.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. It was interesting. That's what he mentioned. I asked, specifically who are some of the returners, who's standing out on special teams, and he kind of gave us that broader answer, which I think we can kind of fill in the blanks on who he's referencing, right? He mentioned several running backs, some wide receivers, but specifically that cornerback room. If you're not a front-end guy at that corner room, Texas is going to utilize you, the speed, the length, the size, as a gunner, as a guy on kickoff, as a guy on punt. It's going to be really intriguing. It's a full arsenal, going back to what we've seen in the past, whether it be a Keaton Crawford, a Keelan Robinson, a Trey Wisner, who really made his impact felt on special teams early in his career as well. That's kind of the standard in this Texas special teams room under Jeff Banks. Now, going to punting, he said Michael Kern, Jack Bomeister, both of them having very solid springs. He said both of them, quote, are bombing the ball this year, end quote. So that's a great sign on the punting spot. So, of course, we've seen what it's like for Texas to have the punting unit be a weapon, whether it be a Ryan Sanborn, whether it be a Keaton Crawford or Keelan Robinson going down there on punt as gunners. You know, those help put your defense in great situations, as we've seen in 23. Saw it every now and then in 24, but not too often. Now, Jeff, what's going to be interesting is what happens at kicker, because Sarkisian mentioned, hey, this week we're really going to start ramping up the intensity in the kicking situations at practice. What does that mean specifically? I don't think we know, but it does feel like, okay, kicking, just keep these guys around, keep them involved, keep the competition right, and then we'll start to amp it up as spring continues. He said it got to see more consistency amongst the legs and kick with the field goal kickers, but more than that, it's about the consistency between the battery. That's the holder, that's the snap, that's the kick, and the hold itself. So we'll see where that goes, which kicker works best with which punters, as well as which punters are in a great spot to really hold on to the snap from Lance St. Louis, the long snapper on the roster for the Longhorns.
Yeah, CJ, when I think about the kicking situation, we kind of talked about it as we were walking out of Moncrief today. You know, Mason Shipley from Texas State is in the portal. And, you know, hey, if for whatever reason, I'd like to think that one of Will Stone or Bert Auburn's going to be kicking field goals, PATs for this team in 2025. But if Sark and Jeff Banks get to the end of spring and decide, you know what, either we need a third or we don't think either one of these guys is going to be the guy, you've at least got an option in the portal to go in there whenever Mason Shipley gets in there and the portal opens. So they've got an option. Now, Mason Shipley could already know where he's going, and it could be a moot point. But at the end of the day, with Shipley from Texas State being in the portal, you've at least got a kicker right down the road that if you wanted to go there, you could go there. They went there. They didn't waste any time in this winter window going to get Jack Bomeister from Utah once he went in. So they needed we know the punting situation wasn't ideal last year. And I know it sounds like we're talking a lot about special teams, but if you look at this team, the way it's constructed, if we're thinking that the offense might need a game or two to really start to come together with as many new pieces as they've got, and maybe if you're still good, maybe even elite, but maybe not as quite as elite as you were last year, whatever margins, especially early in the season, you take a step back in offense and defense, you're going to need to make those up on special teams. And special teams can't be a reason why you're losing games. So that's why we're talking about it so much, CJ. It's got to be a thing that helps Texas. It cannot be a detriment like it was at times last year.
Yeah, so I think we're all expecting a bounce back from 2024, given the personnel, given who Texas has gone out at punter as well. Again, I think right now the big unknown with special teams beyond kicker is who are going to be your returners. We haven't heard a whole lot, especially will it be an Aaron Butler? Will it be a DeAndre Moore when healthy? Could a Ryan Wingo be trotted back there in certain situations? What about a Ryan Niblett? We just don't know at the moment. And Sarkisian didn't really hound on it today. But one other thing I wanted to mention, Jeff, Sarkisian and DeAndre Moore, a few administrators from Texas also took the trip out to Washington, D.C. Last week for the House settlement bill. Sarkisian spoke on the House floor, basically saying, hey, we want college football to remain college football. We don't want this to turn into something where it's employee-based. Unions, CBAs, whatever's to come with that, it's only going to muddy the water, and I'm not sure I'm ready to sit here and fire players or cut players the way that it happens in the NFL. So really interesting to hear him talk about that. I put out about a 2-minute video of Sarkisian speaking on that. We'll have that playing on the winning drive as well. So listen there. But, Jeff, let me get your thoughts on what Sark had to say about his trip up to D.C.
Yeah, the term unionize, anytime you talk about college sports, it's one of those dirty buzzwords that nobody likes to hear. I don't look. I'm from the state of Texas. We don't have much of a union culture in Texas, so I'm out of my depth talking about unions and are you pro-union or are you anti-union. I just know that a lot of people, no matter what side of the argument you're on, share the same opinion with Sark. You don't want it to go to the NFL model where you've got a union, a players association, and then you've got collective bargaining, even though you're going to have that's essentially what revenue sharing is, CJ. It's some form of collective bargaining like we see in professional sports. But look, The sad thing is the NCAA missed a chance to do something about this, at least put some guardrails in. They just sat on their hands, like as the NCAA is known to do. They sat on their hands and did nothing. That's why we're in the situation we're in now, where the coaches are having to deal with it, the players are having to deal with it. And look, I'm all for freedom of movement for the players. I'm all for the players getting paid. The flip side of that is, if you're going to be an employee and you're going to have what essentially amounts to a contract, well, then the university needs something in their coffers. They need to have some sort of leverage as well. And if that's revoking a scholarship, if that's cutting guys, and we're not even talking about, CJ, that term we like to use, a processed out, where it's kind of a nice way of saying, yeah, you're not cutting a guy, but you're effectively telling a guy, hey, go somewhere else. You could just outright just punt guys, and that's the end of that. So I will die on this hill, CJ. I don't think this is going to get anywhere anybody wants it until power conference football separates from the NCAA and does their own thing. It's almost moot to talk about it otherwise. As far as, when you talk about the House settlement and rev sharing, the one thing that I don't know how they're going to do it. It's kind of like anytime, a politician talks about they want to raise taxes or lower taxes. How are you going to do it? And I don't care what side you're on, they never have a plan on how they're going to raise taxes or lower taxes. It just sounds cool to say. And fair market value. That's how the third party collectives can be involved. Fair market value. Okay. Number one, who determines what fair market value is? And number two, who enforces fair market value? I don't know. I haven't heard anybody come up with the answer to those questions. Like, let's take Arch Manning. Let's use Arch as an example, right? Arch Manning right now, if as we sit here today, I don't think it's a stretch to say Arch is probably the projected number one pick in the 2027 draft. I don't think I'm going out on a limb saying that. So are we saying that Arch's market value is commensurate with what the number one overall pick in the NFL draft would be paid? So therefore, is Caleb Williams' rookie contract or Cam Ward's rookie contract, is that equivalent to Arch Manning's fair market value? And then it goes from there. So look, I'm just throwing that out there because I don't know what else you have to go on. So there's a lot more questions than we have answers. But I do like what Sark was asked, and Sark didn't give an answer. But you need a Nick Saban. You need somebody that you need a commissioner. You need a commissioner's court, for lack of a better term. You're going to need some kind of a structure, some kind of governing body like the pro sports leagues have. And you can still have the college structure, albeit a different one. I just think it's going to have to be away from the NCAA when you talk about power conference football.
Yeah, and he was asked if Nick Saban should be the commissioner of college football, and he said, look, people would listen. He said that kind of lightheartedly. But on top of that, look, unfortunate situation in Tennessee, right? We've talked about it with Nico and Josh Heupel, the splitting there. Look, you're getting in that position where players are going to believe what they believe in terms of their value market and in terms of what they should be paid. And schools are going to be dead set on what they think that player should be paid. And sometimes you don't see eye to eye, and that's hence where you see Nico entering the portal, and we'll see where he ends up. But Sarkisian so far doing a great job of retaining this roster and also making sure that these conversations are not turned into issues that extend beyond the locker room or getting out to us, really, Jeff.
Yeah. Sark's biggest issue, CJ, and you know this because he's talked about this since it happened. Sark's biggest issue right now in terms of the portal and how it's operated is the situation that happened with Malik Murphy at the end of the 23 season, where he started a couple games. Texas would not have been in the position to be in the CFP if it wasn't for Malik Murphy. But with the way the portal's structured, and quite frankly, the way academic semesters are structured, Malik Murphy had to make a decision on, hey, do I keep going with this, or do I do what's best for the team and stick it out and continue to be QB2, or do I do what's best for myself and go into the portal and try to find a new place to play in 2024? And I'm with Sark. I don't like the fact that guys have to make that decision. I wish they didn't. You work so hard, you spend all that time trying to get to a playoff, and then because of something completely out of your control, nothing nefarious you did, you can't be a part of this team in the college football playoff. So it's an unfortunate deal, but I like the fact, CJ, that we're getting ready for the spring portal window to open. Somebody asked Sark about player retention, and he said, hey, I'd much rather deal with it right now than have to deal with it in December when we're competing for a championship. So they'll deal with it. But the other thing Sark said right there, CJ, in talking about, and again, you put that on Twitter, right? On your Twitter profile. Yeah, at CJ_Vogel_OTL, if you're on the Twitter machine and want to see Sark's response. He mentioned something that I think we all fail to mention. NIL funds and the funds the collective has are not unlimited. I know we all like to pretend when the portal opens, hey, go get this and this and this and pay for this and go get that. Well, that sounds fine and dandy, but it's not like you have an unlimited salary cap and unlimited funds to go do that. So I don't see that. I don't want to say I applaud Josh Heupel for what he did, but Josh Heupel had to take a stand one way or the other. Either we're going to come up with the money to pay Nico Iamaleava what he wants, or at some point, and we've seen Texas do this, CJ, with some guys in the portal, at some point it becomes fiscally irresponsible to make those calls, and you have to make a tough decision. So, I know, would Josh Heupel love to have Nico as his quarterback in 2025? I think if you ask him, all things equal, absolutely. But Josh Heupel had to make a decision that wasn't in the best interest of his quarterback, but it was in the best interest of Tennessee, because with the portal opening, now at least Tennessee can go find another quarterback. Even though it's probably they might get a great find in the portal, or it might be somebody who's a step down from Nico. I don't know, but it also gives Nico, hey, you don't have to, kind of lurk in the shadows to do your negotiating. We're going to let you go so you can go do it out front and do it in good faith with these schools to try to get a payday. So it's not a good situation for anybody, but I guess at the end of the day, this probably works best for both parties. I guess
it works best for Tennessee,
for lack of a better term.
It worked great for Tennessee. I'm still waiting to see what that market looks like for Nico, because what he was getting at Tennessee, I would be shocked if he's able to get that off the open market. But we'll see. Some teams always need a quarterback, and some teams are always desperate to pay for the quarterback. But right now,
either way,
fun pickings.
Yeah, either way, CJ, I think they're both in as favorable a spot, all things considered, with the situation. But at the end of the day, I don't think Nico's going to be in as good a situation with his next home and his NIL deal. And I don't know that Tennessee is going to be markedly better at the quarterback position. But who knows? Maybe everybody finds what they're looking for.
Yeah, we'll see. Of course, everything else from Sark's presser over at ontexasfootball.com. Jeff, one other thing I wanted to mention, Texas basketball picked up a commitment today from 6'10" Xavier big man Lacine Traore. He did not play in 2024-25, but he did average 11 and 10 rebounds, being a top 10 mark in all of college basketball in 2023-24. Big news for the Horns and Sean Miller, who is right down the road from me right now. Texas now with 6 players on the roster for next fall over 6'8" in height. So that's a really, really encouraging sign in terms of rim protection, defensive rebounding, etc. Big pickup for the Longhorns. We'll break that all down on the winning drive as well at ontexasfootball.com. Jeff, any last words before we get out of here?
Yeah, 2 things. One on Lacine Traore. Rodney Terry mentioned this, and this is why I like Sean Miller retaining Chris Ogden as the GM. Ogden kind of knew where this roster needed to improve, and with enough guys coming back, with Tremont Mark, Jordan Pope, and Kendall Weaver, and Vincent, and some of these guys coming back, Chris Ogden kind of knew where the holes needed to be filled, for lack of a better term. And that staff had talked about, hey, we got to get bigger, we got to get more physical to compete in the SEC next season. So they're going out and adding a bigger body, like you said, CJ. Traore, not as well Titus, more of a skilled big, but Lacine Traore is going to give you the rebounding, that physical edge, a physical paint presence, and a guy that can protect the rim a little bit. But rebounding, interior scoring is what he's going to bring to the table. So I love the fit. In terms of the Sark press conference, I had a chance to ask Sark finally about Neil Brown and the special assistants and kind of what their roles are. I'm sure you and Rod will get into it with Coach Shipley on the winning drive today, but I like the fact that he specifically mentioned with Neil Brown, he loves having the extra set of eyes of a former head coach, because they're looking for a lot of the same things in practice, and Neil Brown might pick up a few things that Sark may have missed throughout the course of practice. So essentially it's a second set of eyes for Sark, which is great. I also like Kerry Joseph, who was the quarterback coach for the Bears last year, being the defensive special assistant, so he can help PK from hey, here's what you're doing, and here's how an offensive play caller might see this, and here's where they might try to attack you. So I love the two, but Sark's been on the money, CJ, with the special assistant hires. I think he made two really good moves with Neil Brown, who Arch Manning spoke highly of last week, and Kerry Joseph. And we'll talk more about that here on the channel. Like I said, you guys will talk about it on the winning drive, and we'll have more about it also over on TexasFootball.com.
Well, good deal. Jeff, thank you very much. And for Matthew behind the scenes, thank you as well. That wraps it up for today's Sark availability. And again, catch us at 3:15. Me, Coach Shipley, and Rod Babers talking about everything else from the weekend in sports, as well as Sark's other notes from the press conference this morning. So thank you very much, and y'all have a great afternoon. Happy Monday. Welcome.